Thanks very much for kind of coming so early. I know kind of 8:30 is a bit early for people's brains to start working, but hopefully we'll do this easily. And what I want to talk about today is kind of a trend I see with lots and lots of companies where things are becoming a lot faster in many directions. People can deliver a lot faster, we can ship things faster, we kind of have shorter delivery phases, and that's creating some really interesting opportunities for us. So I want to give you an idea that I've seen in a couple of places that is kind of still a bit emerging, and hopefully that's going to start challenging the way how we approach software architecture as well. And my mission with the talk today is to kind of plant an idea in your brain that's going to make IT 10 times more useful for your company. But it's going to be kind of stupidly difficult to do, and it's going to take a lot of effort. So although the idea itself is simple, it's not going to be that easy. And at the same time, I think it's well worth doing. So one thing that I kind of see as a trend in lots and lots of places is that we're starting to reduce delivery phases. People that used to deliver every 2 years now deliver every 2 months. People that used to ship every 2 months now ship every couple of weeks. And I've even worked with a couple of companies where people ship 10 or 20 times a day. And that's creating some really, really interesting dynamics. And it's changing the way how people need to operate. Lots of kind of teams have now moved to Scrum and things like that. And Scrum talks a lot about cross-functional teams and how we need to blur the roles a bit so we can deliver better. And at the same time, kind of although Scrum says you only have a kind of product owner, a Scrum Master, and team members, you don't divide the work among team members in terms of roles, lots and lots of teams kept different roles as well. It's very common to see kind of people still being testers or analysts and things like that. And I even worked with a team that had a Hydra. Kind of they had a Scrum Master, a product owner, and they had a Hydra. And Hydra's name was Marko. Marko was this kind of fantastic guy who every time he would fix a problem, he would introduce 2 new problems. And we were trying to kind of fight him off all the time. And every time we tried to kind of look at where he fixed the problem, if you put that line of code into Google, you would typically find something on Stack Overflow. And that's kind of one of the really interesting things where Stack Overflow has done for us. I think it made discovering stuff a lot faster, and it made fixing stuff a lot faster, but faster is not necessarily always better. There's lots of examples where fast isn't really that good. And kind of, I think what a lot of teams do today in terms of continuous delivery is kind of like fast food. Although continuous delivery is this really interesting trend where we can ship stuff a lot faster, we need to start making sure that what we're actually doing is not this type of faster. And when kind of, especially I think our industry is quite obsessed with speed. We equate fast as good, kind of automated testing, automated deployments, everything automated, everything is kind of good. And when we think about doing things fast, what most people imagine is, oh, you know, we're going to build this fantastically nice engine. It's going to be incredibly fast, and people will love it, and things like that. But kind of fast is not necessarily always good, because you can go too fast as well and kind of end up in a situation that is not necessarily where you want to be. And one of the things that the general trend in the industry where we start shrinking delivery phases, we start introducing this kind of continuous deployment pipeline and reducing the barrier to entry is creating that we don't necessarily see that well, is it's making it much easier for people who request stuff, whether they are stakeholders or business analysts, to just request crap. Because the barrier to entry now is so low in terms of getting the requirements into the system, kind of people just end up requesting lots and lots of stupid stuff that gets deployed. And that's one really interesting factor here, that if we want to get the value out of continuous delivery, if we want to make IT a lot more important for our companies, that's what we need to start preventing. And One interesting metric there that came out a couple of years ago is this research from Microsoft. A guy called Ronnie Kohavi, who was the director for experimentation at Microsoft, did some research on how well the stuff that they've implemented and released to production actually achieved any of the business objectives they were supposed to achieve. And instead of predicting what's going to happen, what they used to do is they went back and actually measured whether their predictions came true, whether kind of, oh, you know, if we just do this, we're going to make a lot more money, or the users are going to be happier, and they measured whether those things actually happened or not. And he released this paper called Online Experimentation at Microsoft, where he talks about how kind of over the couple of years before the research and kind of the data they looked at, about 1/3 of the initiatives that they did actually produced some statistically significant positive results. About 1/3 of the things they didn't really create any statistically significant results, and about 1/3 of the things they did actually created a negative result. Because the barrier to kind of put requirements in is now so low, anybody can request anything that can go to production relatively quickly, teams end up pretty much spending 2/3 of their time doing stuff that doesn't make sense. And even kind of the 1/3 that actually does make sense is kind of negated by the 1/3 that created the negative result. So if we are going to start doing something that kind of makes a lot more sense out of continuous delivery and things, that the first thing that we need to do is kind of prevent that or be able to react to that a lot better. And this is where I think continuous delivery has an incredible potential, but people are just not using it that way. And where if we started changing our approach to what we deliver and how we deliver, now that we have the technical capability of delivering a lot faster, we can open up lots and lots of interesting opportunities. And this is where just kind of blindly ignoring and kind of letting stuff go and making it faster can start creating some really, really interesting problems, because kind of at the end of the day, I think, you know, in terms of if we look at the future, we're pretty sure that at some point the world is going to be destroyed by kind of something like this. And that's going to be caused by a copy-paste from Stack Overflow. And I'm really not happy about that. So we're kind of, we're going with this, it's the barrier to entry and the barrier to change things is a lot kind of less now than it was 10 years ago, which has its kind of good sides and bad sides as well. And I think what we need to start preventing is kind of robots from taking over. And when this kind of copy-paste from Stack Overflow happens, sci-fi authors are going to have kind of a field day, and they're going to laugh at everybody saying, oh, you know, we predicted this 50 years ago, and everybody knew about that. And Isaac Asimov kind of in 1948 in iRobot kind of declared 3 rules for how to prevent robots from taking over the world. And he has this kind of thing where he talked about that rule number 1 is pretty much that a kind of robot shouldn't ever be able to injure a human. And that's the most important thing out of the whole thing. So the other thing that he talked about is how robots kind of always need to obey orders except for number 1, and how kind of they need to protect their own existence pretty much. And I think kind of these 3 rules, although it's sci-fi and things like that, have some really, really interesting implications of what we can do with continuous delivery. And I'll come back to that a bit later, because I think kind of part of the answer on how we need to fix what we accept into delivery pipelines and what we do with that lies here, because that's how we can prevent kind of fast from becoming too fast and from becoming dangerous. And kind of going back to the real world, I think continuous delivery is one of those really, really interesting things that is a significant shift in what we can do and how we can do it. We had this meeting at a conference a couple of years ago where people were arguing that pretty much everything that people talk about now as emerging trends in programming and in software delivery, those were things were all invented 30 years ago. And pretty much everything that people talk about at conferences, oh, this is kind of new and exciting, those things were all invented a long time ago, and people used it. Things like automated testing, things like kind of packaging, automated deployments, and things like that. And the only thing that, you know, nobody could dispute is continuous delivery is genuinely kind of a new invention. And continuous integration came out as a practice probably about 15 years ago, but if you read Kent Beck's original book, continuous integration was basically have a single computer in a room where whenever people need to integrate code, they'll sit on that computer and kind of start typing. And then cruise control came out, and then a couple of other things came out, and kind of continuous delivery now kind of came out as an idea. And I think as an industry, we're at the point where kind of the engineering industry and things like that were when electrical engines were being introduced. Before electrical engines were being introduced, people used steam, and they used steam-powered engines, and they had a big boiler in a basement of a factory. And then what they would do is they would build factories to be very tall. And the reason for that is that you can then power a huge factory by basically putting a single boiler in the basement and then having pipes that go up because kind of steam is going to go up and then power lots of things through the factory. Now, when the first electrical engines came in, what they used to do is just kind of take the boiler out and put the electrical engine in the basement and put the wires up. And this was good because it exploded less. It kind of, you know, it was less polluting and it was cheaper, and this was all good. But then people realized that, oh, we were building these tall factories because of the constraints of how steam works. We no longer have to do that, and we can now kind of, we're no longer constrained with the old world. We can do something else. And instead of building very tall factories where you lose a lot of energy by kind of moving things up and down, people started building flat warehouses and flat factories because electricity can pretty much go anywhere. So I think we're at that stage of the industry now with continuous delivery. We're still doing the boiler thing. We're still kind of just putting an electrical engine and kind of building tall factories where we're no longer constrained with the old world. And what I mean by that is continuous delivery is now opening some incredibly interesting business opportunities. For example, General Motors about 2 years ago was hit by a massive recall order from the American Road Administration because they had some batteries in their cars that could kind of burst up and go to flames, and they ordered General Motors to take about 20,000 vehicles for repair, which kind of costs a lot of money, is kind of a slight embarrassment, not as much as what Volkswagen did now, but and it costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time, not that good for business. Tesla Motors was hit by pretty much a same order at almost the same time, a month later, and they were required to recall about 21,000 vehicles because of a battery potentially going on fire. And what Tesla Motors did is basically released an update over the air. Tomorrow morning, new software went to all their cars, and the battery problem was gone. So this is kind of the old world crumbling, where you have one company that has to get 20,000 cars to go into a repair shop, get them fixed, get them repaired, and things like that. And another company that is able to just kind of ship stuff over the internet and fix a problem temporarily until the car goes into the repair shop anyway. And the business potential for these things is amazing. Now, continuous delivery, if we do it right, enables people to do something like that, enables people to kind of run circles around their competition and do things that were never possible to do before, because we're no longer constrained by the old world rules. And at the same time, continuous delivery has some serious implications that are outside of the world of technology. Like this, on kind of customer service and repair, but it also has some serious kind of side effects that programmers typically don't think about. And I learned about that the stupidest possible way by kind of losing a lot of money. And I'm working with a team now, we're building this collaboration tool. And straight from day one, we made it possible to kind of deliver this thing as much as we want. Like we can just package it up and ship it 20 times a day if we want. And this is kind of our growth curve over the last couple of years in terms of the number of users coming on board. What you'll see is kind of over there we had a slight spike. That's where we announced kind of the first beta version. It came out on the front page of Stack Overflow and Reddit, and it was there for a whole day. So it was a massive spike. Lots of people came, and then kind of that dropped off. Then somewhere over there is when we decided to open source the whole thing. And again, we got a spike, people coming and things like that. And then after that, for 2 years, we were trying to repeat a spike like that, and we couldn't. What I've realized is that one of the most important things to get new customers on board is to have newspapers and blog sites and things like that writing about us. And by doing continuous delivery, we've taken all the risk out of delivery, but we've also taken out all the drama. There's nothing ever new to announce. It's a stream, continuous stream of very, very small improvements where there's nothing ever big enough so that PC World will write about us again like they did here. And by doing that, we pretty much killed the most effective marketing strategy that we had. And it took us 2 years to kind of figure out what to do. And we finally kind of figured out what to do over there, and I'll talk about that later. But lots and lots of kind of teams end up doing that, and this is a big problem for companies that move to a continuous delivery model, where we take a technical problem that's kind of technical risks of delivery, we solve that, but like Marco the Hydra, we introduce 2 new problems that we don't really see. And this has a massive impact on marketing. It has a massive impact on customer support. Go and talk to somebody in the customer service center where their screen changes 20 times a day, and they'll tell you that they don't really like the whole continuous delivery thing. And kind of one of the most important things, if we are going to do continuous delivery right and prevent kind of robots from taking over, is not introduce these problems. And kind of, although, you can say, oh, I'm stupid and I've caused these problems for myself, lots of other companies have this problem as well. Tesla, for all the brilliant benefits that these guys have, also create marketing problems for themselves using continuous delivery. One really interesting thing that kind of Tesla does is very, very often they start releasing features through software. You buy a car, but over the next couple of years, you get new features just over the air, and people are now used to that. But occasionally, they do something completely revolutionary, like their autopilot feature that was released a year ago. And autopilot is basically what they started doing is they put in, I think, 4 X-rays, a sonar, and 12 cameras on a car. I don't know why they need a sonar. Maybe if dolphins start attacking or something like that. But basically, now a car has complete operational awareness. And if you start driving a car and somebody in front of you stops, you don't have to react. The car is going to react automatically and change a lane. Or if there's an accident up front, they'll kind of start slowing down automatically and things like that. So Tesla Autopilot is this amazing new road safety feature that requires a lot of hardware equipment as well. Now, because they started releasing features through software that much, the users started feeling entitled to updates. And the fact that some other car now gets this autopilot and you don't, starts creating angry users as well. And this is kind of what happened to a guy called Richard Wolpert from, I think, Washington, who one day woke up and read on the news that Tesla is doing this autopilot now. And he was really, really angry that his car that was 2 years old is not going to get this update. And he started petitioning online to force Tesla to retrofit this update into old cars. Now, think about it this way. So this is the equivalent of somebody with, a 1995 Sony Ericsson phone saying that, I can't watch YouTube on my phone and everybody else can. And because I bought this phone 10 years ago, you should do this for free. And this is something that lots of companies have seen where as people move away from versions, as people move away from, you have every year we have an update and you have to pay for this update and things like that, we move to continuous delivery, users start feeling a lot more entitled. And kind of people started petitioning online. People started creating kind of huge actions where, this had, I don't know, 1,000 signatures, where lots of those comments were sensible. There was a guy from Norway saying, this is an important safety update. It might save the lives of my children one day. I should get this. And it's irresponsible from Tesla not to offer it to old cars. But at the same time, this requires a sonar. It's not a software update. And also, when this started going, people started being angry about other things that they expected Tesla to do. So there was another guy saying, oh, I should get this thing because I bought the car 5 years ago. Also, I want to dual drive as well. And the only right response to that is kind of, how can you possibly do that? Because if we approach this from a technical perspective, we know that, the dolphins are attacking and things like that. You need a sonar. And you don't really have that hardware in the car. So we can give you the software over the air, but what are you going to run it on? At the same time, people like Richard Wolpert don't really see that as a new car anymore. They don't see kind of hardware, they don't see this. All they see is, hey, there's an important new safety update over there, and I'm not getting that. So it's kind of regardless of the reason, customers have completely different expectations as we start doing continuous delivery, as we start shrinking delivery phases. And that's an important thing to keep in mind because it completely changes the dynamic of what happens. And this is why kind of a lot of, when people reduce the barrier of entry kind of to releasing stuff, a lot of just kind of crap requirements start coming in because it's much, much easier to do stuff. And hey, we can just start putting things in. And people start, although we can release faster, we start spinning in circles a lot more. And that's kind of a really interesting problem to start looking at. The second thing that typically happens when kind of we start talking about continuous delivery is there's a big difference between what developers perceive as valuable and shippable and kind of something that can go live, and what customers perceive as valuable and things like that, where kind of, for example, I was in the middle of a talk at a conference 6 months ago where kind of a dialogue popped up on my slide saying, oh, we have an important Java security update for you. And, that's not important. What's important is the work I'm doing at the moment. And kind of the Java security update is important to somebody completely different, but, it was on top of my screen in the middle of a presentation, which is kind of stupid. So stuff we think about and kind of stuff we can do now doesn't necessarily mean we need to do it. And kind of in terms of continuous delivery, although, when I talk to developers about continuous delivery, most people think, oh, we can now ship stuff and it's all fantastic and it's all good and it's all live. We need to start thinking whether we're doing this or whether we're actually doing something more like this, where we're force-feeding our customers with stuff they don't really want. So the next time your PDF reader says, oh, we have an important security update and we need you to restart everything you're doing because this is really, really important, that's kind of developers at some company just kind of force-feeding stuff on people that don't really want that. And this is where, we can claim a lot of developers' arrogance and user stupidity. And again, we need to start thinking the way we're doing things. I was in Australia 6 months ago, and Australia is one of those weird countries where internet's not yet been invented. I mean, they have it, but it's nothing like anywhere else in the world because it's stupidly expensive. And when we were there, the conference organizers told us, don't even try to kind of buy internet in hotels and things like that because it's kind of stupidly expensive. But here's this kind of device that is connected to a local mobile network, and you get an incredible 1 gigabyte of data to use for a whole week. It's like, wow. So as I was preparing for a conference presentation there, I like tweaking my slides kind of up until 10 minutes before the presentation. I wanted to use this really nice picture. I was looking for it. And all of a sudden, my browser stopped working nicely. And I downloaded about half of that picture, which is kind of stupid because I can't just show half of a picture on a slide. And I thought, Chrome is playing again. So I shut down Chrome. I restarted again. The picture doesn't even start downloading. I try Firefox, it's the same thing. And then I realized kind of, something else is going on here. And I kind of try and figure out whether I can connect to any other sites, and nothing's really working. And what's happened is my mobile phone decided to update the operating system pretty much at the time when I was looking for this picture, and took, you know, all the remaining gigabyte that I had and interrupted this thing in the middle. So although I'm pretty sure that, you know, for the mobile phone operating system developers, this was a really important update to ship that very time. For me, some other things were a lot more important. And if we're thinking about continuous delivery, this is the second biggest problem we need to solve. Although we can potentially ship something, we don't necessarily have to force feed our users at the worst possible time with that. And as we were doing, I mentioned kind of, we appeared on the front page of Reddit and Hacker News that day where we had a massive spike. What we did that day, looking at the analytics, is we pretty much interrupted the biggest marketing spike we had about 4 times, because we did 4 releases that day, and every time after a release, the usage went down like this. Although we had a ton of tests and we could prove that every release we did is perfectly well functioning as the one before, every time we did that, we caused lots and lots of problems. And I've realized later that because we had such a massive spike in traffic, what lots of mobile networks do is they will cache HTML, but they're not going to cache JavaScript. So every time we had an update, we kind of still had people hitting us, and they were getting on all the HTML page, but we were no longer serving the old JavaScripts, and this was all kind of going really badly. So we were interrupting lots of people's sessions, although we didn't even know we were doing that, because it didn't depend on us. It depended on kind of mobile caching everywhere else. And kind of that's one more thing that we need to start thinking about. It's not just kind of, are we shipping the right requirements, but are we shipping these things at a time when we should be shipping them or not? And this whole continuous delivery model opens up a lot of opportunity for abuse there. So the third thing that's a major problem for people when they start thinking about continuous delivery and generally reducing the length of between releases is UX. Every single UX designer I've ever spoken to is really scared of continuous delivery. Not just continuous delivery, they're scared of iterative delivery anyway, because how can you possibly update only one page of your website and kind of leave all the other pages in the old design? That's going to be horrible, confusing to users. Or how can you change, you know, one button on the site from material design to flat, or from kind of some more, you know, is all designed to material design and things like that? It's just going to look stupid. It's going to look bad, and UX designers don't want to do that. And that's why kind of UX and marketing people typically start fighting against developers when you start doing continuous delivery. And that's one really major problem that we need to start solving. And there's good reasons for that, because again, there's a huge potential to confuse users. Although we can ship stuff, we can start causing lots of confusion if we update the wrong things at the wrong time. So, for example, PayPal, a couple of months ago, introduced this new business dashboard, which they said is going to be amazing, it's going to be brilliant, it's going to allow you to do stuff easier. And we sell books through some kind of online website that pays us through PayPal in US dollars. And one day I woke up and there were kind of about £5,000 missing from the account. And we really got scared that somebody hacked into the PayPal. We started kind of looking at what's going on, and we couldn't see any transactions in the transaction history of kind of people stealing our money. And then somebody realized, oh, but kind of the amount in pounds we have is the same, but all the dollars are gone. That's kind of strange. Why would somebody only steal dollars if they're stealing this? And then we realized that kind of, oh, you know, these guys have updated the UX, and the way they've updated the UX is kind of, they completely ignored that anybody can have multiple currencies in the account. So they were only showing one currency, and the UX designers obviously did this beautiful business dashboard that showed how much money you have in the account, but they completely forgot that, you know, there are people who have multiple currencies in the account. So kind of what they did is kind of pretty much, they've updated one part of the UX, they've left some other parts not updated, and that started causing huge confusions for people. And we were not the only ones. There were lots of complaints that day, and it took them about 3 days to fix it, but I assume their customer service center was suffering really badly those 3 days from people calling and complaining that their money's gone. So kind of that's another one of these kind of continuous delivery challenges that we need to start solving. And unless we solve that, We're always going to fight against UX designers. We're going to fight against marketing people. And we're going to lose. So kind of at the same time, if we do continuous delivery right, we can start doing what Tesla does, kind of running circles around the competition and being much, much, much more effective, much better than everybody else. And that's the big challenge. That's the big challenge for kind of us as IT people in companies. If we can pull this off right, we can create significant new business opportunities. But if we do it wrong, we create angry customers, we create problems for support, we create angry marketing people, and a lot of other stuff. So that's where I think we need to start thinking about going back to kind of Isaac Asimov's 3 rules. And if I kind of look at this, what my colleagues and I did when we were looking at kind of what we did wrong, somebody kind of brought this up as a joke, but we started saying, well, you know, this is kind of the problem we're in now, because the robots took over. The fact that we can release really, really quickly made us release 4 times a day at the point where we had the most important marketing day in the history of the whole thing. And instead of doing this right, we just kind of messed it up. And we need to start kind of creating continuous delivery in a way that makes a lot more sense. So we started talking about, well, you know, mustn't kind of injure a kind of human. Well, that's kind of pretty much, if we're going to do continuous delivery right, whatever we do must not confuse users, ever. We need to start planning our deliveries so that we never, ever, ever confuse anybody. Because if we confuse people, we create a problem for ourselves. And kind of it's up to us to figure out how to divide this stuff, how to organize it so that we never confuse people. Now, the second thing that kind of this talks about is, well, this must kind of obey orders from people and things like that, which is kind of, shouldn't really be interrupting people's sessions. If the way we're doing continuous delivery causes people to kind of have to log out, have to log in, have to stop what they were doing, if it interrupts people kind of doing more important work at the point where we're releasing, that's a problem, and people will fight us on that. So the way we do continuous delivery mustn't ever interrupt sessions. And not just sessions, it mustn't really require people to do anything apart from what they were doing at the moment. I worked with a TV station where when they moved to a continuous delivery model, their editors became really, really angry. Because what developers used to do, oh, we fixed this important bug, we'll push this thing out, and then everybody has to log out and log in again to get the new software updated. And they're just stupid. That's kind of us as IT people turning a technical problem into a business problem, where somebody's writing a news article and then halfway through they realize they have to kind of kill the whole thing and restart again and lose their work. And there's no reason to do that. That's just people not thinking about this straight. And the third thing that kind of Asimov talks about is that robots must ensure their own existence. And in terms of continuous delivery, in order to kind of continuous delivery to ensure its own existence, it can't really fight against marketing people, because marketing people are always going to win. If you have a developer and a marketing person fighting, the marketing person is always going to win, unless a developer has some really, really good arguments for that. So kind of in terms of this, I think it mustn't really kind of cause any problems for marketing initiatives. And this is where we can talk about, well, you know, people are feeling much more entitled. They don't really understand what they're getting. They think they're getting a lot more than they can and things like that. And if we can do continuous delivery so that kind of it satisfies these 3 things, I think we as IT people can make IT a lot more important for our companies. And we can start opening up significant business opportunities that did not exist before. We can start building flat factories instead of building tall factories, and get kind of make IT a lot more important. So kind of when we started kind of thinking about this for this collaboration tool, we realized that if we look at these things, there's a big misunderstanding we had in our heads. And I think lots of software teams have that misunderstanding as well. One of the biggest things that came out of this as well, you know, this doesn't make sense anymore, is we thought deployment and release are the same thing. And because we thought deployment and release are the same thing, we caused all these problems. So kind of for most people that I work with, deployment and release kind of, well, you know, of course, that's the same thing. You kind of, you deploy, you release and things like that, but kind of, there's a huge difference between these two things. And if we start decoupling those, that's kind of removing tall factories and moving to kind of flat factories, because in the old world, deployments and release were the same thing. Those constraints shouldn't really apply anymore. A deployment is a technical event. A deployment is kind of moving code to production. I'm really talking about production here. I'm not talking about deployment to staging and things like that, because that's all crap. But deployment is a technical event of moving the code to production. But kind of, if you have kids, then you know that a release is a carefully timed marketing event where stuff that's already there becomes available. And if we start thinking about deployment and release as two completely different things, then we can open up a world of new possibilities. Because, hey, we can reduce the technical risk of deployment by pushing code to production 30 times a day. But if we do this right, we can decide when to release completely separated from that. If people are doing something really important, we can decide, well, you know, the code is deployed, but you don't have to take this release. Or the code is deployed, but it's not yet released. Or if we are kind of suffering from a UX designer kind of claiming that you can't possibly do this in an iterative way, well, we can ship it to production, not necessarily release it. Or limit the release. Release that only to a couple of users, or release that only to a subgroup that only cares about one currency. I mean, if PayPal did that, then there would be absolutely no problem. They have a database, they know exactly which of their customers have only one currency in the account, and if they released the new business dashboard only to those customers, nobody would complain. But because deployment and release were the same thing for them, then everybody saw that and lots of people complained. So if we start decoupling deployment from release in our heads, we can start opening up a world of possibilities for people. And I think one of the most important things that kind of is going to enable that in the future, and this is a very, very tough technical problem, but instead of turning a kind of simple technical problem into a huge business problem, what we can do now is we can take business problems and turn them into a tough technical problem, which is kind of good. That's why we're here. And this is kind of to start decoupling deployment and release. And the key thing to do to decouple deployment and release is to kind of start multiversioning everything. What I mean by that is design our software so that multiple versions can run in parallel on the same instance of software. What I mean by this is that if you have, like we did, mobile networks somewhere around the world caching HTML but not caching JavaScript, that's not a problem at all. Because if the old stuff asks for something, well, they'll just get the old version of that stuff and nobody's going to know any different. If they get a new version, then they can use the new features as well. And this is kind of something that is a really tough technical problem. It's not going to be simple to do this, but it's a really, really important problem to solve. So what I'd kind of like to challenge you to think about is the next system you design. Maybe the current system you've designed, it's impossible to do that, and you know it's done. But the next thing you design it straight from the start so that it supports multiversioning. And kind of, we've retrofitted multiversioning into this collaboration tool, and it took us about 2 months to kind of properly do that. And kind of the biggest challenge was actually data. APIs and things like that are easy because you can send a version number and figure out what to do. You can unit test that properly and things, but data tends to be the biggest challenge. After we've kind of enabled multiversioning on the data, everything became a lot easier to do. And for companies that are doing kind of websites and things like that, this is going to be a lot easier because kind of what we have is, well, in every HTML, we just kind of have a complete timestamp of every single thing we release. And pretty much, you know, a version of HTML is going to talk to its own version of JavaScript that's going to talk to its own version of APIs and things like that. And we'll kind of unit test it at the API boundary. And what I mean by multi-versioning is not necessarily keep running all the versions for eternity. What we run is about kind of 6 or 7 latest versions just to make sure that kind of people who've cached this, we've measured that it takes about 2 weeks for all the HTMLs to completely die out. So kind of, we run about kind of maybe up to 10 versions at the same time. And kind of as we started doing this, things became a lot easier. Some really, really interesting opportunities opened up because now we could not only decide to support all users at the same time, but we could decide to narrow down a release to only 100 users, or release only to people in a particular territory, or release only to people that have a particular feature that they're using, and kind of actually prove and test that this thing is working correctly with them. So kind of that opens up some really, really interesting new possibilities for doing things. But kind of one of the key messages that I want to get you to think about is that continuous delivery without multi-versioning is just irresponsible. As kind of technical people, if we're doing continuous delivery and we're not supporting multiple versions running at the same time, we are going to create marketing problems. We are going to create business problems. And although, you know, like Marco the Hydra, we don't necessarily see those problems when we create them, they will actually be there. So kind of, there's a couple of really interesting opportunities that start opening up if we start doing multi-versioning. And one is that we can start slicing and segmenting things based on performance and based on capacity. So we worked with a client that is going to launch a new social network across all their games. And instead of having to implement everything on kind of, you know, 10,000 concurrent users and things like that, they've decided, oh, we're just going to do this so it works for 100 users at a time. And they've built the front end, they've built the functionality, but the back end was horribly unperformant. It could run on one machine, which means that all the distribution problems you don't have to deal with now. They've released it for 100 users, and then kind of they started expanding it later. So this is a completely new thing that opens up as an opportunity. We can start proving that this thing works really well. The other thing that opens up as an opportunity is, oh, we can possibly not go and try and give 100% of our users 2% of what they need, but really do 100% for only a very, very small population of users, deploy that to production, and release it only to those users, and we can start segmenting things kind of based on what people actually need to use. So this is where kind of Marty Kagan talks about this as gentle deployments in his book Inspired. And he says if you want to do UX iteratively, what you do is you provide something really, really good for 2% of your users and say, hey, kind of switch to the new version if you want to get this out. And here's a link to switch back to the old version if you have problems. And that kind of solves the whole UX iterative deployment thing. We had the problem with this collaboration tool a year ago because Google in kind of 8 releases of Chrome from 26 to 34 pretty much broke Canvas in every single release. And because they broke Canvas, our site was broken. And although they kind of fixed it in a couple of days, we had lots of people complaining about this, and we couldn't fix it because kind of Google was breaking that. And we decided kind of Canvas is too edgy. It's too new tech, and we need to move to something that is more stable, and we decided to move to SVG. Now, this is one of those big all or nothing changes that, you know, if you're changing the underlying technology, everything has to change at the same time, otherwise there's no value. But what we did is we did kind of the Marty Kagan thing. We decided, oh, we're going to do this, but we're going to slice it so that it only works up to 100 kind of nodes in this document. And we don't really need to optimize performance. We don't need to make it work for every user. We don't need to do lots and lots of things. So we can do this really quickly. And it took us a couple of days to get the initial version out. And then we told people, oh, you know, go and kind of switch to the new version if you want to get this new flexible layout. But here's a link to switch back to the old version. And then we started improving performance and kind of putting things there. So if we, by doing continuous delivery in this way, enabled us to kind of turn a really difficult business problem into a technical problem and start solving things in a lot easier way. So that's kind of where this thing opens up. So I'll leave you with a story of Doug Bowman, who was the director for design at Google in 2009. And Doug Bowman decided he wants to change the color of the hyperlinks on the Google homepage. And he came up with this idea that, oh, you know, it needs to be this color. And went to developers, and this was, I don't know, you know, change number 5,000,003 of the colors. And the developers were really angry. But at the same time, I mentioned, if you have a designer fighting as developers, designers always win. And this time, the developers were actually a bit smarter, and they decided that what they're going to do, they're going to use the potential that they have, that's kind of delivering quickly and doing multiversioning, to actually kind of turn a business problem into a technical problem. And they said, well, why are we changing this link 5 millionth time? And they said, well, this color is much better, much nicer. People will click more on that. It's much more beautiful. He said, OK. So we have this opportunity, so we don't have to release it to all the users at the same time. And what they did overnight is now famous on the internet as 41 Shades of Blue. Kind of completely unrelated to 50 Shades of Grey, but kind of, I think has similar results. So what they did is that night, they actually deployed 41 Shades of Blue to the Google homepage, and they tested what users click on more to prove the designer wrong. And tomorrow morning, they had the data. And they had the data that his color was actually performing worse than the current Google color. And they went to Marissa Mayer, who was in charge of the Google homepage, and said, look, he's making us change the color. And if we change that, and if we scale that to 100% of our users and leave it running for the whole year, the price of that is $250 million. Should we do this? And as a result of that, Doug Bowman quit, or he was fired. So kind of they saved $250 million and a salary of an overpaid designer. And they didn't change the color. So what these guys did was they enabled the business to kind of turn the fact that they could spin off quickly and they could do multiversion, they could release to only part of the users to actually decide on a business problem. And that's the really interesting thing here. So kind of the last thing that kind of really I want you to remember is, if we're going to do continuous delivery right, the most important thing is that kind of we need to mentally decouple deployment from a release. Those are two completely different things. And if we start doing this right, that's going to open up a whole world of new opportunities for us. And the second thing is, instead of kind of force-feeding our users and giving 100% of our users stuff that's incomplete, we need to start planning our releases so 2% of our users get 100% of what they need. And that's pretty much it. And kind of as a way of thanking you for getting up so early in the morning, and I know there was a party last night and things like that, I want to give you a small present for attending this. So kind of, if you go to this URL, you can get kind of a ebook of 50 quick ideas to improve user stories for free over the next month. And that's kind of, that's that from me. I know that I think I've overrun a bit on time, 2 minutes. So I'll be in the hallway if anybody wants to kind of chat about this, but thank you very much.